Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is October 3, 2025. Want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. Also want to thank the wonderful wild world of Robert Anton Wilson for introducing me to today's guest, Eric Wagner. Where are you calling from, Eric?
Corona, California.
First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Kindness. I think so. You see that from so many different positions. Whether it's Jerry Garcia and Robert Hunter, or I think Huxley at the end of his life said he's sort of disappointed in that after all his years of study and spiritual search, there's just a little bit more kindness that we can do.
You fell out there after Jerry and Hunter. What was the name you said?
Aldous Huxley.
Oh, Huxley. Oh, okay, great. Huxley said it too. Kindness is a great answer. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Well, great sex. But I like reading books. I like movies.
That is three great answers. Now, the second one, did you become a reader, one, because your parents told you to, two, they did it as an example, or three, on your own?
Yes. I was lucky enough to appear on the game show Jeopardy. And my mother took some credit for that because when I was little, my bedtime was 8 o'clock. But if I read, it was 8:30. Programmed my and I lifelong readers.
Wow. There's a little dropout on your sound once in a while, so we'll try to deal with it. Okay. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Count Alfred Korzybski in 1919 tried to define why human beings or how human beings are different from other animals. He took two steps back. He defined plants as the space-binding class of life. Plants are very good at using sunlight, the soil, and water to live. Korzybski defined non-human life as the space-binding class of life. Dogs can cover territory and use it much more effectively than trees can, except in Middle Earth. And dogs will fight over their territory. So they utilize space in much way that the plants utilize energy. Korzybski defined human beings as the time-binding class of life. We can communicate over time in a way unlike any other species. Our grandparents can tell us about traditions when they were children. And I don't think that whale songs or dog barking or bumblebee dancing show that sort of communication. So that's sort of my sideways approach, that it's part of our nature to use information. Timothy Leary defined consciousness as the ability to receive, decode, and transmit information.
That is good. You covered a lot there. You almost did the whole interview in 3 minutes there, so we're done. No, that was good, Eric. But you answered this in a way, but I have to ask it: is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented in humans?
And I think that's the whole nature versus nurture question. And I wouldn't, when Robert Anton Wilson interviewed Tim Leary back in the early 60s, before Tim got fired, I think, or no, just after he got fired from Harvard, but he was still pretty scientific in his attitude. Tim hated speculating beyond. And it seems to me those sort of questions, we're just coming to the point where maybe we can answer them, if you know what I mean.
No, I know what you mean, because I'm almost asking that question for 40 years, 1,000 interviews. 99% say, well, it's innate in us to collect information. So I kind of want to drop it, but every once in a while people go, it isn't simple nature nurture. Is it more invented or more in us innately? So it's like, it's me and you versus the wording on the questions. You don't have to answer the questions. They're just prompts to get you to talk. So you get it. The next one is, do thoughts create emotions?
Side question. Are you familiar with Michael Johnson and the
No,
overweening back?
no, go ahead.
He wrote The Long Afterword to Straight Outta Dublin. And he keeps up with brain research in a way that I do not. So I think these are questions that scientists are trying to answer at the neurological level right now, and I am not equipped to answer them at the neurological level. You know what I'm saying?
But it's more so your hunch or your guess. You don't have to. Yeah.
And it's interesting because Mike Johnson wrote a long introduction for another Robert Anton Wilson book talking about intuition and Aleister Crowley. I don't feel I have great intuition, and I don't trust my hunches. It's interesting. I loved Robert Anton Wilson's books since '82, and up until 2015, I felt like I sort of understood the trajectory our world was going on, but I would never have predicted Donald COVID-19. And my one hypothesis is, you remember when back in 2012, some people thought the world was going to end? I think maybe it did. And so that we're living this sort of weird post-history, post-whatever. And so now I'm grateful to be alive each day and watch what happens. I hope it's not too bad. But I do not trust my hunch or intuition as much as I might have in those carefree 2014 days.
Really good. So fill in the blank, Eric. I don't know what I think until I.
Do you remember the 70s game show Match Game?
Yes.
Okay, because that's the question they would have. And they had that great disco music. Bum, bum, ba-da, bum, ba-dum. I don't know what I think until I breathe or until I live through it. It's interesting. There are some writers who say you don't know what you think until you write it down. I think sometimes you don't really know what you think until you have to defend it talking to an intelligent person who disagrees with you. I think because, again, there's a lot of stuff I think I sort of kind of know and understand. But then when someone puts me on the spot, it's like, I mean, that's the thing teaching for a living. Is people will come out of left field with questions about something I think I understand. I say, I don't know. I'll go home and research it. When I come back the next day, the student forgets having asked the question.
That's John Cage. When they asked him a question, he'd go, "That's a very good question. I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer." But that was good what you said. Breathe is an amazing answer, right? See, McLuhan says, "I don't know what I think until I say it." Joan Didion said, "I don't know what I think until I write it."
Yeah.
Can humans think without language?
Oh, absolutely. We've been babies. Babies think a whole bunch. If you think the 8-circuit model of the nervous system that Tim Leary developed and Robert Anton Wilson nurtured, you've got the infant consciousness and the toddler consciousness, and then you have language. So we all have that reptile brain. Go towards what you want, away from what you don't want, which involves things like the lizard. Then we have that mammal brain, which your dogs have. And they have pack hierarchy. They got things they like, things they don't like. And that's what's going on in us up until we get to the point of language acquisition. And it's going on with us our whole life. That wonderful groggy period when you wake up, your eyes are too blurry to look at your phone.
Chomsky says language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Eric, what do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Otis Redding says, try a little tenderness.
That is a great answer.
I don't know if you're familiar with the writer Charles Rosen. He wrote about classical music mostly, or Joseph Kerman. They're both musicologists. But the idea that in Western classical music, we have these notated systems, but Kerman emphasizes that there's also a non-verbal tradition, pianists teaching students. There's lots of stuff that's not in the score that you pick up in music lessons, much the way African music continues, or other, that we think about Western music being notated, but there's also this incredible tradition, of people studying with their teachers. I think I'm so blessed to meet you today. Who knew Mr. Zappa, who knew Mr. Boulez, who knew Mr. Messiaen. So we got this huge tradition going back. Just as a side note, I'm fascinated by these little nexi of radical thinkers. I think about the people in Harlem during World War II who created hip-hop. And similarly in Paris, right after World War II, Messiaen had this seminar at the Sorbonne, I think, and his students included Boulez and Stockhausen and Berriot. And it's like the school didn't like them, but they were like totally redefining music. And you read Stockhausen and Boulez talk with such warmth about studying with Messiaen. And when the internet first got started, that was my hope, was that we create these virtual Mintons. Mintons was the nightclub on 125th Street where Thelonious Monk was the house pianist, where bebop was really born. And that idea that online, like, you and I both live in Southern California, but we haven't crossed paths. I haven't been in Venice Beach since the 80s, I don't think. But here we are able to interact today.
Yeah, you touched on something really important, Eric. I've been investigating because I throw these things called a salon, and you touched on one. I forgot his first name, but Zephyrin, Zipirn. He had Kabbalah salons in New York City with Bob Dylan, Bruce Conner, Thelonious Monk, and they all sat around, did peyote, and discussed the Kabbalah together. I mean, that's the kind of salon you're talking. The other one was, are you aware of Ed Ricketts, Steinbeck, Henry Miller, Christian Murdy? All had a Finnegan's Wake salon in Northern California.
Oh, that is
So I love that you even brought up that idea, because it is in Black Mountain, there's all these places. The one you probably know best is Alan Watts, Ram Dass, and Leary on that threesome talking. It's an amazing tape.
May I give a tangent here? Thinking about Black Mountain, next year marks the centennials of the poets Frank O'Hara, Robert Creeley, and Allen Ginsberg, as well as Miles Davis and John Cole. And I was lucky enough to meet Creeley and Ginsberg at the Ezra Pound Centennial back in 1985 in Maine. And I think I mentioned my great-grandfather Maximus. And I sort of realized I had this huge copy of the Maximus by Charles Olson that my mother had given me back in the 80s. And so when Maximus was a baby, I started taking a picture every time he came over with the Maximus poems. And I plan to keep doing that until he turns 18, and I'm going to give him the book. And so it's like I'd never finished it before. So now I've sort of been wrestling with Charles Olson, because my fear is that he's going to be, what's this book about? And I'll be able to answer it.
Look at Eric, I'm for tangents, anecdotes, and stories. You don't have to answer the question. So yeah, be free with that. That was beautiful. I loved it. So your observations of humans in general, are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
Yeah. I'm not sure how accurate Leary's model is, but for him, the second circuit is feelings, emotions. That's that mammal brain. Part of the brain we're very similar to, God bless Jane Goodall, but apes or dogs function emotionally a lot like them. Then we have the cerebral cortex, which does the sort of linear thinking. And they're both working all the time. I think the danger is we often kid ourselves we're thinking when emotions are coloring that.
Oh, he's so smart.
Yeah. That's like Bridget Bardot says, when I make love, I don't think. I'm like, good luck. How do you turn your brain off? And people who meditate say, okay, now think about not thinking. And one last one, there's a bumper sticker on a car on my street and it says, don't believe everything you think. And I'm like, well, you could say, don't believe everything you feel.
I think that's very interesting in terms of Robert Anton Wilson was friends with a number of physicists, and he liked the idea of model agnostic, not believing any model, but using them at different. Philip K. Dick had his own way of doing things. And so if you read interviews with Phil Dick, it's like he would believe something intensely for a few hours and move away from it. So you read these different interviews with him where he would seem like he totally believed something, but it's like he was trying it on for size, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so there are lots of different ways we can process these things. But yeah, and in terms of, thinking about Mr. McLuhan and the impact of modern social media, we can get our thoughts so reinforced by our social media feed, by the videos that YouTube picks out for us, that then we start having the technology reinforces that process of blinding us to our perceptions.
Brilliant, Eric. You're really articulate and concise. I really appreciate this because a couple things. Marshall nailed it. You mean my whole fallacy is wrong? And Duchamp even upped him. He said, I'm going to contradict myself so I don't conform to my own ideas. And Philip K. Dick knew the word believe has the word lie in the middle of it, LIE. And Philip did writing workshops right down the street at the Venice Public Library. So he's in the air, man. He's here. Okay, so these are two from Alan Turing in the 50s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
I'm fascinated by the writer Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi. And English translations of him use the word soul. And I think he understands it, but I don't.
Yeah.
So what are the distinctions between spirit and soul, bio entity? I'm working on that.
Beautiful. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
And I go back to Larry's definition of consciousness, or that it is being able to receive, decode, and transmit information. I think you could see machines doing that. You could see a chess set doing that. It depends how you want to define thinking, I think. Again, I think there are probably mathematical and operational definitions of thinking that I'm not aware of that would probably be able to nail that down in concrete terms. In terms of what AI is to us as a community college teacher, I teach English. I'm curious if the research paper is going to disappear, if AI is going to change, and what the future education is going to be. Whether I have no, I don't really have a prediction, But as AI created research papers become closer and closer to human written papers, so much of education is built on research papers. That's what's going to happen with that.
I think the form will change, but the essence of people researching things, I don't think that will change. We'll forever be digging deeper and deeper. Because my friend taught me yesterday on AI, he gets the answer and then he goes, "What's your source on that?" So AI is supposed to come up with page 9 of this book, line 3, blah, blah, blah. But Eric, I want to tell you one other thing about form. I appreciate that you take a moment before you answer and you take a breath in. It reminds me of one of Robert Anton Wilson's friends who I was employed by for a half a year, George Carlin. His daughter, I interviewed Kelly, and every time I asked her one of these stupid questions, she would do what you did. She'd take a deep breath, pause, and then she would crack up. So I love them. See, the again, it's the form. People think, oh, I asked you a question, you got to answer it right away. No, you can take it says in my interview instructions, you can take as much time as you want. Silence is okay. So I want to tell you, I appreciate that you do that. Now, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I would think happiness, but I'm driven to read Proust, Joyce, and Ibn Arabi. So I think what makes me happy often involves study, which involves approaching meaning.
Yeah. Okay, I got the question from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. He says meaning tends to last, happiness doesn't necessarily last. What's your thought on that?
I think meaning also changes, but it's not as mutable as our emotional happiness. Okay. I think it seems to me a lot of people have sort of said, oh, I already lived through the golden years. I just didn't appreciate it at the time. I didn't appreciate all this happiness. So we've got this constant flux of daily stuff. Look back and say, oh, these were wonderful, even though the struggles going. And I think the process of meaning goes through slower changes. That when you're a little kid, what's important is toys, and then you got the adolescent reality, and then you got to pay your bill, etc., or worry about the and global climate change. And so all these different processes of meaning are changing, and it's I think I'm not aware of it oftentimes till back. You don't know what you've got till it's gone. They took paradise and parking lot.
Dude, that was amazing because it evoked something I'm sure you've heard, or you might have heard this. My friend said, what is the best era of sci-fi writing? The 20s, the 40s, the 60s, or the 80s? The answer is when you're a teenager. And that is, I think, music, literature, almost everything in our lives. It's when you said adolescence, that's when it hits you and it remains with you the rest of your life in a way or in some form that's, anyways, that's very, very interesting. Now, does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
Here again, I would say we could go to the scientists, and they're working on this. In the last 35 years, been so much work has happened with how that sort of thing is actually bubbling and happening at the neuron level. We can observe ourselves, and I think about there are these very long, whether it's the yoga tradition or the Sufi tradition of people watching their conscious very sophisticated idea. And even you against Wake doing that. I'm struck by how little Joyce scholars agree about what Joyce was actually doing. Whether he was trying to observe the dream state. I know John Bishop wants to say it's the whole night process. But Robert Anton Wilson said the more he studied Joyce, the more it seemed he was accurately depicting both the dream world and other altered states of consciousness.
Yeah. No, that's a great pursuit. And we have that commonality of trying to investigate the motive behind Joyce and what did he actually do. So that was a really good answer. Is what's faster, Eric, the speed of light or speed of thought?
Dude, I haven't smoked any marijuana for a long time.
Dude, there's three words in the Wake that summarize the Wake. It's DOOD, DOOD, DOOD. Joyce goes, dude. No, that's good. I haven't either. I used to call it herbal knowledge, and now I call it herbal ignorance, but all the power to them. Audre Lorde, the poet, said you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer, her colleague, said you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest? And it doesn't have to be tangible.
We live in a very pregnant moment. And I certainly don't claim to have the answers. Ilya Prigogine won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, I believe. And he suggests that traditional ideas of entropy prove
Susie, can you put that black back over that sun?
Yeah.
Thanks, Eric, because I was hoping we would reboot because it might fix. There's still a little stutter in the sound. I get a little stutter in your sound, so we miss words once in a while. So maybe that will cure it. But you were saying Ilian, entropy, and then you can go on.
Yeah, so Prigogine, and again, I don't know the chemistry to actually understand this, basically suggested that in open systems, things tend to reorganize into higher levels of coherence. Robert Heinlein wrote his future history, a timeline. He called the time we're in right now the crazy years. So once again, Heinlein seems like a somewhat accurate prophet. So whatever's happening now is going to drive us to higher levels of understanding. Yeah. Robert Anton Wilson used to call Lyndon Baines Johnson pacifist president, because by the end of Johnson's term, a lot of Americans were talking about warfare way off the path before. He called Richard Nixon the anarchist president, because when Nixon resigned, many Americans were talking about government the way only anarchists had before. He called Ronald Reagan the intelligent person president, because by the end of Reagan's term, people would start to evaluate intelligence in a different way. Now, I think Reagan's legacy is fascinating because there are a minority of people like John Oliver and myself who say so much wrong about our culture went back to the Reagan years, but very lauded by a large percentage of the population. His reputation is very much south. Perhaps Donald Trump is our Akbarian or spiritual president who's going to force us to really deal with deeper levels of consciousness and love and forgiveness, us to try to deal with our family members and friends and neighbors who think us less than human.
Yeah.
It's a really good
Wow.
point. It's like
Wow.
I'm from Flint, Michigan, and they say in all those cities that are just bad now, they go, they can't get any worse. They can only get better. So that was a real good breakdown. And LBJ, did you see that thing recently? It said they showed the letter he wrote to the Smothers Brothers telling them it's so important that we don't censor you.
But of course, fired anyway. It's interesting thinking about 1968. There's a documentary on Bobby Kennedy on Netflix, and he quoted Aeschylus frequently. And that's just, for me, a marker of how the world has changed. People complained about how elitist they found Barack Obama, but he wasn't quoting Greek playwrights from 400 BC.
Yeah.
You know, nobody can get away with that today. I'm also struck by the 2020 Democratic primary field. Beto O'Rourke, Pete Buttigieg both named Ulysses as their favorite book. Joe Biden mentioned Ulysses. So it doesn't show up a lot in public discourse, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah, Buttigieg, and Biden has a rare copy of Finnegan's Wake.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, some edition. Yeah, really
maybe
good.
Presiding while asleep.
Say that again.
Maybe Mr. Biden was presiding while he was asleep.
But Eric, I did miss the word before Buttigieg. You said another guy named Ulysses.
The guy from Texas who lost to Ted Cruz.
What's his name?
Beto O'Rourke.
Oh, Beto O'Rourke. Okay, thank you. He's a Ulysses guy. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, because I studied the Wake with a lot of people in Texas, Austin, Texas. So we'll get into that. We're getting there sooner or later. Okay, so but what was I didn't quite go back. What is the new tool that you do suggest? What, in one word or two? What was the word?
I think a lot of success will come with older tools.
Okay, yeah, erase the word new.
Okay,
Let's just go tool. What tool do you suggest?
There's a passage of William Carlos Williams, which I can dig up maybe, where he talks about it's hard to understand the news by studying old ancient poetry, but you can do it. The idea, Ezra Pound defined literature as news that stays news. Yeah. So it's, to me, like right when the lockdown started, somebody had on Twitter a big War and Peace study group. And a lot of people said it was a lot of good, brilliant stuff in it. We can go back and listen to live Schubert and Mozart. The tool of listening and friendship can be rediscovered. And that seems to me, Bill Maher annoys me a lot, but he talks about how we can't hate our neighbors. We can't hate that 40% of the population that totally disagrees with us. And so somehow learning to find common ground through our dogs and our grandchildren's and Charlie Brown and the Beatles it beats me. Perhaps we're beyond the point of no return.
No, I would say summarizing what I heard is the tool you suggest is learning common ground.
Yeah.
Yeah. And studying the past. You sort of implied that. Now, I asked the tool question so much, someone said, well, what about a toy? What toy do you gravitate towards?
My copy of Proust. my friend, the novelist Rafi Zabor, whom I highly recommend, he accused me of being OCD because I read all of Proust 3 times in my 50s. And so I sort of forced myself to stop rereading Proust for a while.
Yeah.
But that's something I know I can get lost in. And I think about it took me so long to finish Straight Outta Dublin. I worked on that for over 20 years. I got a little bit tired of Joyce. And so it's like, I think about, I was forcing myself to study Joyce to get that effing book done. But Proust, it's like I read it and I have all these questions that aren't answered yet. And it's like I feel like I could, and again, it's been a couple of years since I did it, but I could totally lose, forget about the world, forget about the environment, study French and read Proust.
Beautiful. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Can I get to sleep?
Yeah.
For work in the morning, oh God, I got to get to sleep. That's my worry. Well, all day long, I'm saying I'm so tired, I want to rest, and then I'm lying in bed and I said I can't. It's like, so it goes.
Eric, I wish you could have met my mentor in the McLuhan world, Mary Jane Schultz. She turned Marshall, Bucky, Ivan Illich, and Norman Mailer onto goddess theory, feminism.
Yeah.
She's an amazing woman. And she taught me this joke that Marshall loved, and it applies to your profession. You're in bed and your mom comes in the room and says, Eric, get up. You got to go to school. I don't want to go today. You got to go to school. I don't want to. The mom goes, Eric, you're the principal. You have to go to school.
Something I'd like to share. You mentioned goddess theory, and I think it's interesting how writers like James Joyce, Ezra Pound, and Robert Graves, not the most feminist of people, or Joyce maybe, were all fascinated by goddesses. In the introduction to Robert Graves's love poetry, he suggests that in Western culture, closest we come to nature, typically in adolescence. As you're living through those changes and becoming fascinated by the body in a different way, people write a lot of bad poetry. But as St. Paul said, the time comes to put aside childish things. Robert Graves said, poets are people who never put aside those childish things.
Yes.
12 years old, their whole life.
Yes.
Struck when I was at the Pound Centennial. Both Ginsberg and Creeley were 59. But they looked like kids. They were uncomfortable in their nice clothes. They were uncomfortable sitting on stage. You had all these guys from Harvard and Princeton and Yale in their 40s. They looked like the old men.
The poets were like living the life. Yeah.
Yeah. They didn't. I asked Ginsberg how to be a better poet, and he said, sit in front of the White House with the sign that says Reagan is a shit.
Unbelievable. Okay. Talking about all your heroes in mind, McLuhan learned from Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Eric, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
In Monty Python's The Meaning of Life, they have a corporate board meeting. And they say, we're trying to determine the meaning of life, and say two things. People are not wearing enough hats. Second, we are born to this world not with a soul, but our soul can come into being through a process of introspection. Unfortunately, we are often distracted by trivia. And someone raises their hand and says, what was that about hats? And so, man, we're trying, Robert Anton Wilson talked about why homosexuals have contributed so much to our culture. Up until recently, they often didn't have children. And so they were able to live a life where they weren't as distracted. Now, children can be an incredible blessing, but when you're trying to keep the electricity on and help somebody with their homework and deal with somebody who's broken up with their girlfriend and all this sort of stuff, I think those sort of questions you're asking about move to the back burner.
Yeah. Really good, Eric. Do artists have moral obligation?
I I was mentioning Charles Olson. There's so much cool Charles Olson stuff on YouTube. There's a place near where he lived in Massachusetts where they have these annual speakers, and they've got them all on YouTube. So there's like Ian Sinclair and Ed Sanders, Michael McClure, and Amumiri Baraka talking about Charles Olson. But they were talking about how biographers say, you know, Charles wasn't a perfect human being. There are very few perfect human beings, you know, and so it's, you know, we have the opportunity now to learn so much about people's lives. Thomas Jefferson, I think, is the fascinating case. You know, the whole idea of living in a with freedom of speech, freedom of religion, was so radical in 1776, and we have benefited so much from it. And Bob Wilson talked about how every revolutionary movement since 1776 has quoted Thomas Jefferson. But by today's standards, we say Thomas Jefferson, we'd call him a rapist, you know, and he sold his own sons into slavery. You know, it's too big to wrap our heads around, I think.
You covered a lot there. I wanted to tell you really quick. I've tried to interview Ed Saunders. He won't. He says he's too busy or whatever. I'm sad because I wish he would. Before he's still producing.
Yeah.
Amira Baraka said yes, and it was great because when I quoted McLuhan, he thought it was Tim Leary. He didn't know the difference between Tim and Marshall, and I thought that was sort of cool. I mean, kind of. I'm not trying to put him on the spot, but anyways, he's an amazing guy, and I was lucky I got an interview with him. But Michael McClure said, you can't turn the machine on. You can't turn the tape machine on, because I just had a couple minutes to ask him a question or two. And I asked him about McLuhan, and he was interesting. He says, I think I got McLuhan. But do you know Michael McClure took Marshall to his first rock concert, and it was Bob Dylan?
Wow.
Just to think of that is sort of cool, you know. So really good. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I don't know that I'm afraid of ideas, but it seems like old ideas back in new ways. If you hear people talk about DEI, it sounds like people talking about Black people 120 years ago. You know, met the new boss, same as the old boss. And so it's gosh, in Ulysses, it's something I fear those big words that I'm not saying the quote correctly, but it's not so much the ideas as how people use them to bludgeon each other.
Yeah, I get that a lot. I get that a lot on that question. And just to tell you the roots of that question, it is sort of funny because I got it from, there's two places that kind of help me form that question. Cage. I can't understand why people are frightened of new ideas. I'm frightened of the old ones. And then Charles F. Kettering. People are very open-minded about new things as long as they're exactly like the old ones. So you see, the thing about the wording on these questions is it's what word does the person hear as the main? So when I say afraid of new and old, they usually go for the new or old. It's like the watchdog of your mind, T.S. Eliot, you know, the form and content thing. A lot of people go, no, I'm going to go for the fear word, afraid. Are you afraid of new or old? In fact, Rebecca Solnit says it so well. Just because you ask me a question doesn't mean I have to answer it. And that's exactly where I'm at. I'm fine with people not answering the question, but it is really good because these prompts are enabling me to hear these brilliant ideas from you. And I appreciate that. So, Eric, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Oh, absolutely. And I love the term conjure. Ishmael Reed wrote a book of poetry called Conjure. I was 3, just about to turn 4. So it's 1966, April. My mother is at some meeting. My dad and my uncle Arthur are downstairs watching the show Batman. I sneak halfway down the stairs and watch. It's the episode where Batman and Robin get covered in plaster of Paris.
That is great. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Yeah. I would say a blessing. It's even if you're sad. It's oh yeah. It had that song. It had to be you has that line. Something like I'd rather I can't remember the lyric, but it's blessing to have known these. I think about that movie Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where Pablo Neruda in Love Poem number 20 says, "Love is so short and forgetting so long."
Yeah. Really amazing. Okay, tell me someone, please, within your immediate family who had an impact on you, and what specifically was that impact?
Well, my grandma, and again, when she died, I got most of her books. I was very greedy, wouldn't give them to my other cousins, including her copy of Proust. And when I was like 48, I want to finish Proust before I turned 50. And I read that 2.5 times until it fell apart. But she and I were really close. I was near the end of her life. I gave her a copy of James Joyce's children's book, The Devil, which he had written for his grandkids. And so after she passed, I got that. And now I read that to my grandkids. And so it's like my granddaughter Taylor, when she was in college, she was reading James Joyce. I said, I read James Joyce. And she looked at me and I said, pulled out the book. Oh, I remember that. So much that my grandmother worked as a librarian. She and I loved it. My uncle, Joe, said to me at her, who is there now for you to talk to?
Yeah. Really beautiful. I really got a good picture of her in your description. Same question, Eric, outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you, and what was the impact?
There's so many people. The pianist Jay Jeffries. It's Jai, and then last name Jeffries, Jeffrys. He's got a couple of videos on YouTube. He's got a wonderful CDs out. He was my roommate from like 1980 or 85, and he introduced me to so much classical music. And so I was so blessed. I remember in 1981, he was doing a recital, and he was playing Beethoven's Opus 10 and Gaspard Dunaway by Ravel and the Grand Toccata by Schumann, and I think the Italian Concerto by Bach. And so all year, go to the rehearsal room and hear him working on those things and talk to them about it. And so I thought that was such a blessing as I've through Dr. Wilson, through Rafiza Bohr, through Charles Rosen, I've spent a lot of time thinking about Beethoven. And I'm an okay musician, but Jay was such a wonderful musician, and he sort of guided me into a much deeper appreciation of what a concert pianist's life is like, and how music works. Of how form works.
Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Yes. My mother was Catholic, but she loved Vatican II. And I remember I don't remember this, my mother would like to tell the story. I was like 4 or 5, and we went to the Smithsonian of Natural History, and there's a thing called evolution. And she said, I came home very concerned, opened my children's Bible, and I pointed to Genesis, and I said, this is wrong. And she did not get mad. Okay. So she liked the Catholic notion that the Bible is the inspired word of God and doesn't contradict science or evolution. I love Pope John Paul II said evolution is more than theory. So I'm not Catholic myself, but I taught at Catholic schools for 27 years. And so I think she prepared me well.
Do you pray?
Yes. Oh, twice a day. Yes.
Yeah. If God exists, Eric, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
That's 100% up to him. I'd be very
I've never had that answer. I know, but just again, back to your hunch or guess, what would make you feel good? You know, like, or no, just what would make you feel okay? I'll tell you. I ask all these questions because I want people to answer them the way I want to. No one's ever said this, and I think it's a pretty good. What would I want God to say to me? Who killed Kennedy? but again, how could you believe this person? That you couldn't believe him, but you think. But you know what most people say? This is what I'll give you the survey. Most people go, "You did a good job." I like, okay. A lot of people say welcome, but I mean, you know, you're doing a Zoom with God and you died. You know, any kind of inclination, that's up to him. Okay, I won't push it, but if you want to say anything further.
reading Phil Dick. Maybe 94, but I think it might have been earlier. I had this notion reading The Divine Invasion that I wanted to put together a team of astral projectors to go back and save the life of Andrea. And some friends and I did that. And our other projects was try to figure out who killed him. And I don't think we really had much success in either of them. But, I am struck in the pre-Trump world, say between 2010 and 2014. You had a hardening of belief in most of my conservative friends about Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone.
Yeah.
That before that, a lot of them would say, maybe, I don't know. But then it became, my wife's ex-husband gave me a book called Case Closed.
Yeah.
That Oswald acted alone.
Yeah.
And I'm struck by intelligent, reasonable people I knew were shifting towards that. There is no other position. That is the only position.
Oh. No, I love it. You know, the Canadian Bob Dobbs said this one, and maybe others, that Oswald was hired to shoot and miss, and he hit by mistake, and so did the other guys hit. So every theory is correct. Anyways, it's a wild world. Okay. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I thought I told you I used to work for Catholic schools.
Yeah.
Okay, well, the only I have known personally who seemed evil to me were some of the people who ran my old high school.
Wow.
But that's just my personal bitterness. I don't know. I have a suspicion that, you know, I'm too close to that. You know, Bucky Fuller said that the things that affect change are fear, ignorance, greed, and zoning laws. That's how I deal with the 2024 election. People were unhappy about the economy. They were scared, and it seems to me in my ignorance that they misevaluated the cause, and they blamed the Democrats for the inflation, and they thought Trump was going to make it better. So that would be ignorant. That's how it seems to me.
That's Krasner asked his guru, why is there evil in the world? And he said, to thicken the plot. Okay. This is the real hidden question there is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question, Eric, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? Like your grandkid says, hey, I'm being bullied. What advice would you give them? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Yeah. I think about the Ezra Pound quote, "The enemy is ignorance." And so, I don't know that I see myself having enemies on October 3rd, 2025, except my own ignorance and my faults. In terms of a grandchild dealing with bullying, I sure don't know. Uh, I'm struck by when I taught third grade, the girls would say, "My mom told me if somebody hit me back," and then I say, "No, please, I want you to tell a grown up. I don't want to have this to escalate." Uh, I don't claim to, who's it? Hassan Minich on his podcast is interviewing Ilhan Omar, and I just started the interview. And she apparently was quite a scrapper when she was in the refugee camp. She would get in lots of fist fights, which I didn't know. And she was very big on standing up. I don't claim. Fortunately, no one has come to me with that question in real life. I don't really know.
Well, here's the follow-up. Really good, Eric. Saying I don't know, I can't answer that is totally valid. I'm glad you can feel comfortable saying that, because some people think I'm putting them on the spot and they have to answer. No, you don't. And saying you don't know, that's totally fine. That's human. But Nassim Taleb said games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. My friend said, well, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. And Gregory Bateson says, if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, oh, I did something morally and socially wrong? So it's, again, a lot of prompts. You can go wherever you want. The question is, does punishment work?
I don't know. I think it's interesting. You know about the prison experiment Timothy Leary did.
Yeah.
I'm struck by people make a lot of claims about that. A lot of people claim they have debunked that it didn't really help us, uh, it does seem that, and I'm no expert on this, that prison teaches people to be better criminals. I don't know. Oh God, some of the Catholic dioceses I worked at, they talked about restorative justice. It just turned my stomach whenever I heard that. I do think, again, that Bucky Fuller quote about greed and ignorance. By privatizing the prison system in the United States, we've the bloodlust and a yearning for vengeance in us as a species that can prove challenging to deal with.
Yeah. And you know what? It's not several people have said, Gerry, your quotes do not follow a through line to your question. But I understand that, because really, what if I say, does rehabilitation help? Some people go, no, punishment doesn't work. But if someone's doing something like killing people on the street, getting them off the street might help humanity, but does rehabilitation help? Well, we had hoped so. What if you ran your Finnegan's Wake reading club in a prison? Could that help these people? Probably. It unites them. We know Shakespeare and theater and prisons help, but again, I'm still trying to figure out how to word that question. It's not worded right. So appreciate that. So here we go to James Joyce. He's the first projectionist in Dublin, Volta Cinema, 100 years ago. And he basically allegedly checks out because he says, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
It seems that we have a yearning to tell stories that goes along with that idea of time binding in Korzybski. So you've got these cave paintings, tens of thousands of years old. Once upon a time seems a very strong motivator, that we want to be find metaphors and stories that can help guide us to answer questions like the ones that you're asking.
Yeah. Eric, this Joycean professor the other day said, Joyce said, leave storytelling to the journalist. I said, could you give me the exact quote? I'm not going to tell it to you. You might know it. But what do you think of that thought? Leave the storytelling to the journalist. Because, you know, we could go into storytelling for a second, because that's an amazing answer to I mean, basically that question is, why do humans do art? Because we have this, you think storytelling and narrative is hardwired in us?
And again, when we start talking words like hardwired, I would
Yeah.
say we want to ask a neurologist.
Yeah.
But I'm struck by the hostility Finnegan's Wake evokes in some readers.
That is great.
I think part of it is people who love to read or even like to read often love conventional narrative and conventional characters. And Ulysses gives them to a lot of people, but there are people like veterans who hated Finnegan's Wake. When I ran a high school Finnegan's Wake club for 3 years, and I had 2 kids who had a step parent who was an English teacher who told them what a terrible idea it was to study Finnegan's Wake. You know, I had a student who went to Barnes and Noble to buy me a copy of Finnegan's Wake. The person at the store tried to talk them out of it. And so is it because Finnegan's Wake does not do what people think books are supposed to, just like the anger John Cage evokes. You know, people who love, Webern, but they think John Cage is just an insult to the 20th century.
Oh, Cecil Taylor too. My friend who writes movie music, he loves Charles Ives. I says, what about Cecil Taylor? He goes, he's horrible. I was like that, but that's what I like that in a way, because that's like one friend, we're studying McLuhan in the Wake, and she says, my mother's an artist, and she said whenever she hears Marshall McLuhan's name, a red flag goes up, and I goes, that's good. That's what you're supposed to say, I'm not saying, but you're supposed to say, oh, Joyce went too far with the Wake. He did a great book in Ulysses, but it went too far. Not that you're supposed to say it, but you know what I'm saying, that he knew he was throwing, some sand in the grind with the gears, whatever that Berkeley guy said.
Yeah. And Ezra Pound and Hugh Kenner were loved Ulysses, didn't think much of Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah. No, that's the whole Neil Postman media ecology section of McLuhan Academia. They go all the way to Marshall said, in order to understand me, you have to know all of Joyce and all of the symbolists. He literally said that, Have you ever read The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler?
I have not.
Oh, you gotta just find it in a bookstore or in a library and read the intro. He basically is a disciple of Hero's Journey, Joseph Campbell.
Yeah.
So Christopher teaches how to write screenplays via Campbell. Campbell got everything he knows from Finnegan's Wake. And then he gets bitched out by some Hollywood people going, you ruined Hollywood, because now everybody's trying to do this, Star Wars Campbell Hero with the 1,000 Faces back to Finnegan's Wake, the root. And I'm like, so Joyce ruined Hollywood and it needed ruining. You've kind of talked about this, Eric, but talk about your tipping point, because you are so many, you have a lot of callings. I mean, maybe teacher is your main call? I mean, you're at a cocktail party and I go, hey, Eric, what do you do? What's the 3 top callings you would say? I know it doesn't matter. You're not trying to impress the person. They just kind of want to know, what do you do? What do you usually say?
It's interesting. In the 80s, I might have said I was a poet.
Yeah.
United States, they would say, what do you do for a living?
Yeah.
One of the things that got me visited Ireland in 1989, I was 27. I would say, oh, I'm a poet. They would say, oh, I should read poetry. I should read more. Lawyers would say that, because that's a culture that really, values poetry. The United States is like, what do you do for a living?
Yeah.
And I've been to some Irish American gatherings and gotten the same response. Again, back in the early 90s, when I still had this self-definition as a poet, I would, they would, I would say, oh, I'm a poet. And say, oh, I should read more.
But I mean, now, I mean, me and you meet, you don't know anything about me. I don't know anything about you. I just say, hey, Eric, what do you do?
Right now, I just retired from teaching full-time with Catholic schools.
Yeah.
Job at a gas station near the house. Teach part-time English at the community.
Yeah. Okay. And you're an author, and you're a musician, and you're a computer guy. And I love somewhere it says you're a dancer.
Yeah.
You do a lot. That's really cool. Okay, Eric, let's go with, go ahead.
Again, that seems in many ways like a fault. In that at 63, I say maybe if I had focused a bit more, I might have had some more material success. You know what I mean?
No, dude. Yeah, that's my main teacher in the Wake in McLuhan said Gerry, you never specialize. That's why it's good, because we're raised to specialize.
Yeah.
But let's go with teaching, because it kind of entails. What's the tipping point for you to be a teacher? Your mom's a librarian. What was your dad's profession?
Well, my grandmother worked as a librarian.
Oh, your grandmother worked as a librarian.
Really interesting. Both of my parents worked for the National Security Agency as computer programmers.
NSA?
Yeah.
You know what NSA stands for?
National Security Agency.
Never say anything.
Oh, that's how they were. I never quit. She thought my mother was a spy her whole life. So retired, after my dad died, she went on a trip to Italy and Greece. And my wife says, no, she's the government sending her over there. But the idea of algorithms and flowcharts was in my blood, because both my parents were computer programmers. When I was like in junior high school, my mom started working for the IRS and went back and got her master's degree in accounting. So she became an accountant.
Yeah.
My dad left the government and worked for RCA. Then he worked for IBM as a computer architect.
So where's your tipping point to become a teacher?
I'm struck by a lot of the English teachers I know hated high school, and they wanted to make it different. And we typically had fights in the department with English teachers who loved high school English and wanted to keep it the same. In all honesty, I was a manager of Blockbuster in the 90s, and my wife got tired of me working holidays and weekends, do inventory overnight. And so she said, why don't you apply at this Catholic school? And I applied to be a biology teacher. They said no, but come be an English teacher. They called me like the next week. And so I basically started teaching, and it's for my whole life. Robert Anton Wilson told me you should be, my natural inclination is to be a teacher or an explainer, but I hate bureaucratic BS, which is how schools are. And so it's a great profession. The kids can be great. The parents can be great, but can oftentimes be a soul deadening.
Really heavy. We're going to go into that a little, but let's go to poetry. Where's your tipping point to, you're reading poetry growing up. Where's your tipping point to go, oh, that's my calling. I can do that.
End of 1983. So 1982, I start reading Bob Wilson, and he gets me to try to read Ezra Pound. I buy a reading, and I'm enjoying it, but I get the Chaucer in Middle English. And I say, I can't read this. I put it aside. Then about July or August of 83, I got Guide to Culture by Pound Library. And that totally turned me on. And I started reading lots of Pound and lots of other poets. Raffi Zabor had an article about William Blake in Musician magazine. And right around
Wait, who mentioned Blake and Musician?
Are you familiar with the novelist Raffi Zabor?
No. How do you spell the first name?
Rafi, and then Zabor is Zabor.
Okay, go ahead.
He wrote a novel called The Bear Comes Home that won the Wagner Prize in 1998. And he wrote a memoir called Iowa Benzie that came out in 2005.
So he mentions Blake in a music mag.
Right, because there was a guy, and I'm forgetting his name, an English composer who set a whole bunch of Blake to music. And so Raffi interviewed him and wrote this article for Musician magazine. And so I went out and bought, started reading him. And I just sort of at the end, like around November of, my thing was my psychic healing. I was in college. Like I would go out and buy a record and a book and go home, listen to music, read the book, and try to get better. And so go out and I buy Pound books and said, "Oh, this is what I want to do with my life. I'm going to do this."
Yeah. That was good. Let's go back to education and poetry for a second and blend them. This is McLuhan in 57. It's misleading to suppose there's any difference, basic difference, between education and entertainment. The distinction merely relieves people of the responsibility of looking into the matter. It's like setting up a distinction between didactic and lyric poetry on the ground that one teaches and the other one pleases. However, it's always been true that whatever pleases teaches more effectively. So tackle it as you may. It's basically, is there a difference between education and entertainment? And then this key phrase, whatever pleases teaches more effectively. Agree or disagree? Yeah.
Yes, but one of my challenges when I taught 7th grade came, last year I taught 7th grade, and especially some of the boys had this attitude that school was supposed to be entertaining. And so they would disrupt class if they weren't entertained. And I think part of it is that they lost some socialization development during lockdown when they were at home. So that their teenage boys are worse than I think. But this idea that school is supposed to be entertaining as opposed to you get the benefits sometimes later. I love the teaching scene in Karate Kid where you got the wax on, wax off, and the student thinks his time is being wasted. I do think that when you enjoy something, you retain it so much more. Okay, and that's a challenge. I also, and this is where I really believe in letting students help design the class and design the curriculum. That if, like I would sit, when I taught American literature, when I did that for years, I would sit down with a textbook the first week of class, and the class and I would design the syllabus. And I'd say, we're going to go through the whole table of contents. You pick what you want to read. You pick the outside books. I'll give you some guidance. And at the end of the year, they'd say, yeah, I thought that was really boring, but we picked.
So wow, they would remember that they picked the board. That's good, Eric.
And again, the idea is that, especially with human lives getting longer, they're going to be in charge of their education for the next 60, 80, 100 years. So I want to get them used to being in charge of education.
That is so smart. Where'd you learn that from?
Well, I was so blessed that I started teaching high school in 98. And I was friends with Bob Wilson, Robert Anton Wilson then. And so we would email back and forth. And I would interview, and especially for 3 years, I taught cantos to my 10th grade honors class, which was so exhausting, but very rewarding. but I would get feedback from him about all the different things I was doing. Like when I started teaching film history, because the English department had so many rules and there was so many wars, the English how we were supposed to do things. Whereas when I taught film history, I could pretty much do whatever I wanted. So when I started teaching film history, which is 2004, I originally designed it as a Robert Anton Wilson class. You know, this is going to be a Robert Anton Wilson class. We're going to watch his favorite movies and talk about his ideas and Marshall McLuhan. Did I have a McLuhan book as a textbook? I'm not sure. I didn't know I did, but I talked about him a lot. But then I fell in love with teaching film. Okay. And it's like I've totally rediscovered film and rediscovered teaching because I love teaching film so much. But originally started off, it was my way to say I wanted to get away from, because there were just wars about what to do. And because some people in the English department wanted us to stop teaching literature and just teach rhetoric.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Eric, everybody, when I ask that question, whatever pleases teaches more effectively, almost everybody goes, yeah, that's true. One person finally says, no, whatever displeases teaches more effectively. I know it's a little of both, but you really favor what pleases us, retain it more.
But we learn in different ways. I think us would never learn algebra and geometry and calculus without the structure of homework we have to turn in. I typically have been a passion-driven learner. You know, my mother used to say, if I cared about something, I would try to learn everything about it. If I didn't care about it, I would not study.
Yeah.
My academic history, my grades would go up and down. Sometimes I would get straight A's. Sometimes I didn't care about school, I would get F's. Okay. Things like mathematics, things like being a concert pianist. I'm an okay musician, but I never had I'm going to practice 2 hours a day for 50, 60 years, the way some of my friends do. So I have those kind of chops, you know, because I tend to be passion driven. And I can see there's a lot of benefit to people who learn to do their differential equations really, really well. You know, people who can keep their mouths shut in department meetings and get university jobs. And, you know, it's like, I think Chomsky talked about that, you know, success in the academic world, you got to learn when to keep your mouth shut.
Totally. Really good. So let's go to you writing poetry. Do you still write poetry?
Yes.
Good. Okay, let's go here. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're writing a poem?
In Cavalcanti's poem Dona mi prega, he said, intention being reason's peer and mate. Some people with deeper spiritual understanding than I have very clear and articulate ideas about these things. I don't. Okay. I would like, you know, I'm struck by, there seems like there was a influence of Sufi poets on some of the 13th century Italian poets, such as St. Francis of Assisi, Guinicelli, Cavalcanti. And so the clarity that you find in medieval Sufi writers like Ibn Arabi and Rumi, there's something very similar that gives birth to Dante and the Divine Comedy. People argue about how direct that influence is of the influence of Dante. But these are concepts that they seem to understand. And some of my friends who seem to understand Ibn Arabi seem to understand, but I don't.
There's theories that Dante read the Sufi poets, or they know he read them.
Depends who you ask.
Okay. So we don't, but it's like Joyce, we know he had this book on his shelf. We don't know Dante had that book on his shelf. We don't.
Well, right. And so I have a book. There's a Spanish writer who wrote a book about the influence of Ibn Arabi on Dante. And he makes what I think is a pretty good case. But I don't read Spanish, I don't read Arabic, and I don't read Italian.
Yeah.
I'm going to put this puppy on. I'm turn off my camera for just 1 sec while I go plug in. Okay, just 1 second.
That's all right. Yeah.
But I can still hear you. I can see you.
Yeah, I'm going to tell people put this picture of your book up.
Oh, bless you.
Straight out of Dublin, James Joyce, Robert Anton Wilson, Eric. Really great book. There's the publisher. And
yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Hilarious is a publisher put together by Rasa Pelorian, who was a friend of Bob Wilson's and Bob's daughter, Christina. And they've done a wonderful job, and they did a wonderful job on this book. My friend Mike Johnson read the book, gave me lots of good corrections. He wrote this wonderful essay that follows the book and really complements it, completes it. I told him I wanted to write a rebuttal to the book, and he did a wonderful job. Oz Fritz and Tom Jackson also read it, and Bob Campbell. I think you interviewed Bob Campbell.
I've interviewed Fritz and Bob. Yeah, but definitely.
Oh, cool. So,
and I want to interview all of them. Hook me up with Michael, our Michael Johnson, and all these. But really good. And I love this thing you talked about, intention, especially, being aware of your deep delve into Finnegan's Wake, like we talked about. I go to 4 Finnegan's Wake reading clubs, and it's always like, why did Joyce do this? And, and it is an interesting book, but it's like, why even worry about the intention of the author? But Kubrick's touching on that thing called ambiguity, because the woman the other day said, what do you mean? Kubrick said, great artist when you can clearly not see the intention. She said, Kubrick's one of the most intentional artists ever. He had intention. We know Kubrick had intention, but I think what he was talking about is ambiguity, like in the sense of Poe giving you only so much information, inventing the detective novel to lure you in. Go ahead, Eric.
Well, and I don't mean to interrupt you. It's an interesting thing that both Pound and Joyce were a little cagey about their intention.
Yeah.
And it's something that Pound wrote so much about so many things. But there's a wonderful Pound scholar named Peter Carroll who talks about how when it talks about what he really wanted to accomplish with the cantos, he's pretty quiet. Joyce was generally, he did not want to be a man of letters. He did not want to explain what he was doing, and especially with Finnegan's Wake. It's John Lennon talking about Paul McCartney's bass playing. Said Paul gets a little cagey about his bass playing. He's a really good bass player, and Paul's an egomaniac about almost everything, but he won't talk about what a good bass player is.
Wow. Okay, now do you know this? Let's go for one quick tangent. There's $100 Beatles book, and it says in it that when John Lennon read Finnegan's Wake, he said, I feel like I'm talking to a friend. Then Holden Caulfield, the book Catcher in the Rye, in the back pocket of the guy who shoots John Lennon. Holden Caulfield says the exact same thing in Catcher in the Rye. When I read a good book, it feels like I'm talking to a friend. Is that a creepy kismet? Is that conceptual continuity or complex clairvoyance or what?
Yeah.
That is weird.
But Jonathan Swift said, we have enough religion to hate each other, but not enough religion to love each other.
Oh, wow. To love each other. Oh, my God. Okay, so we only got a few more minutes here, and I want to propose. I want to propose doing a part 2. In fact, let's just do an 8-part Netflix series.
It's weird what becomes a thing and what doesn't, isn't it? How Joseph Campbell became a pop superstar for a while. I remember somebody, back like 1990 was said, How is it that the two most popular shows on TV are from Matt Groening and David Lynch? Talking about The Simpsons came out in Twin Peaks. It's weird how things come and take. It's like so many people are so excited about this new Pynchon novel coming out in 4 days.
Yeah. Well, that's funny. A lot packed into what you just said. But let's go on with a couple more questions, and then we'll plan a part 2 down the road, Eric. It's really been a delight. This is really truly enlightening. I appreciate it. This is Duchamp. There's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing your poem?
LHOOQ. That's what Duchamp put on his copy of the Mona Lisa. And if you say those letters out loud in French, it sounds like she has a hot ass.
I know, but how does that answer? You are thinking of them, or you're not?
Well, yes and no. But I think about Marcel Duchamp.
Oh, I see. That I got it. Okay. I love that.
Stephen King, he wrote a really interesting book called On Writing. And what's fascinating about it is that he was in the middle of that when he was hit by the car.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
And so that book is like his autobiography, his guide to writing, and how writing helped him heal and the importance of storytelling. But he talks about how many writers write for one reader.
Oh.
Okay. And for him, it's his wife. And so, when I went to the Pound Centennial, I got a William Carlos Williams t-shirt. And it said, Williams is saying, I wanted to tell a story that you would understand, but you're going to have to try hard.
Yes. You know what Robert Frost said? Could you explain this poem? He says, you mean you want me to say it worse? Is that classic or what? But let's go back. The LHOOQ, that's amazing because many years later, Duchamp put another reproduction of the Mona Lisa up with no mustache, and it was called Shaven. So that is like a complete rip. That's not his art. And he's saying that's my art, all because of the title. And it has the title in relation to LHOOQ. It's the title. No, nobody listens that close to who I quote. Or if they do, then like one guy, when I said, Pound says artists are the intent of the race, he goes, anything Pound said, I wouldn't even think about, and that's like a big question. How do you separate the art from the artist? But here's another one, Eric, in this sort of following the through line here. McLuhan said, everything we invent extends some humanness. So the knife and fork extends our teeth. The shutter in a camera or projector extends our eyelid. And maybe even religion or philosophy extends consciousness. What does the writing utensil extend for you? Whether it's the pen or the keyboard, what humanness does it extend?
Well, I don't want to offend anybody, but Mr. Joyce might suggest a child playing with excrement.
Yes. But that's Joyce's. So you're saying I agree. Wait, did James say that, or you're kind of applying what you know of him?
That's my response if you think about these extensions. But the idea is that we make these sounds that can tell stories. Babies cry can say that they're upset. A toddler's squeal can show delight.
Yeah.
Humans then develop spoken language for tens of thousands of years. Then they develop these magical systems of writing these down.
Yeah.
And so Pound loved, Basil Bunting was looking through an Italian German dictionary and saw that dictum was defined as condensare, that poetry was to condense. And so we have these Pound said a poem should hit you like a spring breeze. So we have these ways of making permanent these things that we leave behind. Thinking about meeting you today, I was playing my college class some Zappa last night, and the idea that in Dumb All Over, Zappa says, "Leave a little tip for the next poor sucker on this one-way trip." That's what the artist does.
I think that's Heavenly Bank Account, but that is a great line, isn't it?
Yeah, it's heavily what?
I think that might be Heavenly Bank Account. Yeah.
You
the next
right, but when I googled I think it's just before Heavenly Bank Account starts.
Okay. It could be. Yeah, I'm not good. But that is an amazing album. You Are What You Is Frank as a pop songwriter.
And just I was so blessed with the people I worked with at the Catholic high school. I had one friend, very conservative Catholic, and I loved to talk with him.
Yeah.
And I was talking about, my vocation. God has called me to be a teacher here, and I want to teach these students about, music in my music history class. Should I play this very anti-religious song by Frank Zappa for them? And he says, well, if your job is to teach, yeah.
Wow, that is good. That's American Indians, indigenous say your enemy is your best teacher.
Yeah.
But you don't even consider him an enemy. You're just considering him a fellow teacher.
Well, I enjoyed annoying him. I was like, boy, Huckleberry Finn is sure teaching, the secular humanist viewpoint of the construction. Should I be teaching it at a Catholic school?
Tell him this one. One of my favorite Zappa lines is, "I'm a devout capitalist." That's Frank. And hippies, like, they don't want to hear that. And he was a freak. He knew he spawned the hippies. So the main thing Frank taught me, which I think is Joyce too, is how to embrace contradiction. So do you got to run, or can you do a couple more?
I can do a couple more.
Okay. Let's do a couple more if you want. Okay, here. In that extending things, that reminded me of, Marshall says all words are metaphorical. So what is the word literal a metaphor for?
So again, I think about Emerson's notion of words as fossil poems. I would want to, I've got my phone here. I could Google the etymology of literal. And my Latin is failing me right now. And I probably should go pretty shortly, but I love, there's a bumper sticker that says, "God said it, I believe it, that settles it."
Yeah.
And, for me, the more I read the Bible, the more confused I get. But so people have different ideas of reading things literally. And this is one of the things, and I'll close with this, because I've got to go run a chore.
Okay.
Bob Campbell put together these wonderful Maybe Day gatherings on July 23rd, the last few years, online, where people would talk. A lot of people who love Bob Wilson's work. And I'm just struck by people pursue it in so many different ways. And so I sort of pursued a lot of his ideas in the way that I thought was he wanted, or that, but other people have very different takes on things, and they use these. And, Umberto Eco said that a novel is a machine for generating interpretations.
Totally.
And it's like Beethoven's String Quartet Opus 130. People were shocked by the ending. So Beethoven gave it a new ending.
Yeah.
And, Joseph Kerman, whom I love, sort of says that shows that Beethoven wasn't content with the artwork. I'm like, why can't it exist in two forms? I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Dude, did you know Joseph Beuys read Finnegan's Wake and says, "I can do this," and he wrote his own new chapter? That's what Joyce is wanting. And I really want to explore the difference between science and art with you in part 2, because one guy says science is just uncovering facts that can be interpreted 1,000 ways. So we can observe these things and go, that's a truth, that's a fact, but it can be interpreted. Go ahead. Yeah.
But I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. This is Bob Wilson's take on Giordano Bruno.
Yes.
That the idea was that you had this mysticism and science and the church. And in Bruno's time, mysticism and science were allied. They were the okay. And since science has become institutionalized, it's changed a bit. I'm struck by Benjamin Franklin, dropped out of school like 5th or 6th grade. Some people call him the greatest scientist of the 18th century. Today, we have this blessing of incredible science, but it's built on this university system. And I think it's interesting you have a fellow like Elon Musk, who I don't know what, if any, degrees he has. Some people claim him to be a great engineer. Certainly, he's mostly self-taught. But in general, the academic world doesn't tend to respect so-called scientists who don't have those degrees behind their name.
Yeah. Brilliant, Eric. It's funny because people, it's a little tough of a question. If all words are metaphorical, then what is the word literal a metaphor for? And two I've gotten applied to what's happened with me over the last 90 minutes with you. One is light. They say literal is a metaphor for light. And I've seen the light having this talk with you. I appreciate that. And another person said letter, that literal is a metaphor for letter, letter. And look at Mallarmé's great quote. Everything in the world exists to end in a book, which I think is funny for me and you because we're book people, even though we're music and film people. But in the long run, books live on.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The letter's going to end up in a dump in Boston.
I dumpster dive and I find books that are over 100 years old in mint condition. Amongst cat poop, nothing. It's still mint and it's not ruined. And in 100 years, will we be finding hard drives and Mac computers and chips? Can we dumpster dive 100 years from now some sort of form of communication? We'll still have books. You'll still have that copy of Proust.
You're absolutely right, sir. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Eric. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button. I know this will never end and we'll keep talking forever. Thanks a lot, Eric.